Next up, we have Dr. Bethany Boulton and Dr. Melanie playing the role of Dr. Alex Markwell for us.
Ready? Thank you, Una, for that and for being brave. And thank you for the opportune time to do some square breathing. Helped settle the parasympathetic nervous system, or it may have been the propranolol, but anyway, I'm ready to go. Workplace conflict is something that we face every day in clinical medicine. We often experience negative emotions due to our previous experience or fear of conflict. Conflict can increase our feelings of workplace dissatisfaction and burnout. Today, we'd like to help you change the way you feel about conflict in the workplace. Conflict is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity to drive change and build better relationships. Hospitals are rife with conflict. Why is that? It's because they're high stakes, high stress environments. It's so interesting how some things never change. In 2002, doctors Marco and Smith published a perspective on conflict in the emergency department. They felt that emergency departments in particular were a potential melting pot of conflict due to differences of opinion, value systems, fatigue, and unrealistic expectations from both clinicians and patients. I'm an emergency physician, so that's my everyday world. In preparation for today's talk, I turned to the bastion of all knowledge, the Medical Mothers and Mothers-to-Be Facebook page. I asked our paediatric colleagues where they experienced conflict in the workplace. It was a really interesting thread. In addition to the emergency perspectives we've already discussed, they shared the challenge of providing healthcare to adolescents, conflict with parents, other craft groups such as midwives, and other departments such as Child Safety and the Department of Education. Conflict often arises from frustrations born from the system failures that haunt our everyday working lives. There are barriers to communication in healthcare in the form of noise, interruptions, and the pressure to multitask in an already high-stress environment. Oh.
Yeah, I'm on. Thank you. So when conflict is handled poorly, it has the potential to divide a team and can have a negative impact on patient care. We know that conflict can cause low staff satisfaction and cause morale within the team to plummet. And then we find ourselves with issues with staff retention. Conflict is well described as having an impact on communication within the team. And departments that have high rates of conflict often find themselves having high rates of complaints, both from staff and from patients, and the potential for increase in medical errors and clinical incidents. So I'd like to reframe the concept of workplace conflict as a patient safety issue. So what does workplace conflict look like? Well, it can resemble rudeness, incivility, a lack of respect in the way that we communicate with each other. It can be overt or it can be subtle. And it can be expressed verbally through the words that we use or through sarcasm and tone. And it can be expressed non-verbally as well through eye rolls and defensive posture and the body language that we use when we interact with others. So conflict exists when one person has a need of another person and that need is not being met. Disagreements occur when there is a difference of opinions or differing needs. And the key difference with conflict is in our emotional and our behavioural response to that disagreement, which turns what can be healthy disagreement into conflict. And so this is our amygdala hijack, that lizard brain that we all have inside our brain that tells us that there's a perceived threat from the disagreement. And it causes us to go into that fight, flight or freeze response that's also familiar to all of us. Sorry. So there is a group in the UK called Civility Saved Lives that are actually working to promote the power of civility in medicine. And they present a lot of the evidence for this that we've talked about, it being a patient safety issue. They present that on their website. There's lots of studies there if you're interested in going to have a look at this a little bit more deeply. But what they've shown, research has shown, is that clinical staff exposed to rudeness in the workplace, the amount and quality of their communication decreases. and actually their diagnostic accuracy goes down. For example, when someone is rude to you at work, even just subtle rudeness like clipped tones or an eye roll, we carry that with us throughout the rest of the day. And it has an impact on our bandwidth. And as a result, we have less bandwidth available to think about the care of our patients. So this can be a big issue for staff. We know that rudeness basically affects our ability to care for our patients because it takes up our bandwidth. But what about if you just witness the rudeness? So there's actually studies that show that there's a 20% decrease in performance for people who just witness rudeness between other people. So in short, workplace conflict and rudeness are contagious within our teams. And there is other studies that show that the way that you interacted with the last person actually has an impact on how you interact with the next person that you come into contact with. Rudeness is contagious. So there are studies that actually show this. So this one is a study of 4,000 nurses and 40,000 patients from Hamburg that looked at whether the nurses' experience of civility in their workplace actually had an impact on their interactions with their own patients and overall their patients' experience of the health service. And it's really not surprising that what it showed was that nurses who identified that they worked in a culture of civility actually had better interactions with their patients and were more likely to pass on that relationship of civility in their interactions with their patients. And overall, the patients had a higher satisfaction rating of their interaction with the health service.
So Schreppel and friends from Seattle looked into how professional identity and loyalty to one's own team primes the hospital setting for conflict. They looked particularly at ED and internal medicine relationships because transitions of care are a really important point in time to maintain patient safety. Conversations regarding admission comprised the most common interaction between these two specialties. When disagreements arose during those conversations, there's a potential to broaden a differential diagnosis and further create a management plan. However, when these disagreements dissolve into interpersonal conflict, the outcome was often harmful. The object of this study was to look at the social interaction during these conversations to see how they contributed to moments of conflict. The researchers interviewed clinicians from both specialties. They found that each specialty acted to protect their own. If I don't admit this patient, the late shift, night shift, weekend shift will be easier for my colleague. Each specialty found that their own style of clinical care was superior. Forcing or defending an admission was seen as an attempt to gain control in the battlefield of healthcare. Being succinct and direct regarding the need for admission is an emergency physician's attempt at efficiency. However, using such direct language during these conversations can cause feelings of disempowerment for the admitting team. When the researchers saw the formation of teams within teams, inclusive of both specialties, and clinicians working with humility and acknowledging the uncertainty, the power struggles dissolved. So they concluded that multidisciplinary teams and any act to improve social capital promoted trust and mitigated conflict during ED consultations. Our Canadian colleagues also looked at the causes of and protective factors for conflict during ED consultations. To the surprise of no one, dealing with an individual with a poor reputation, poor communication skills promoted conflict. Those running with a personal agenda and those not providing the expected standard of care were also conflict prone. Conversely, clinicians with a collaborative reputation and those providing the expected level of care, being empathetic, protected against conflict. In recent years, clinicians are increasingly using simulation to help develop skills of clinical skills and acumen. So it's not really a surprise that simulation is also being used to help clinicians develop skills of conflict resolution. These Spanish colleagues completed a literature review that looked at a variety of successful interventions using role play, reflective practice and audiovisual aids to help clinicians develop their skills of mediation, communication and emotional intelligence. They found that it translated to clinical practice and they saw a reduction in errors. Of course, almost every paper said there was further room for research. So what does conflict look like in a clinical setting? So Mel and I are going to role play a conversation regarding admission. I'm an emergency physician. Mel's a paediatric doctor. We don't know each other.
Oh, hello.
Oh, hi, is that Peds?
Yeah.
Look, I've got a 14-year-old girl with an eating disorder. She meets criteria for admission. So I'm just going to book her a bed and I'll get her up to the ward, okay?
I'm sorry, who is this?
Oh, look, it's Bethany from the emergency department. Look, is it all right? I'll just book a bed and you can see her on the ward. Is that? Or just hang on one sec. Hang on.
Demi.
Oh shit. Okay.
Look,
all right.
Just hold on a second. Look, I haven't said I'm accepting the patient. You can't just admit them to the ward unless I say so. And please don't tell the patient I'll be straight down to ED to see them either. I'm actually on my way to clinic and I'm running quite late. They're actually going to be lucky if they get seen at all this afternoon. We're quite short-staffed. Look, I'm really busy. Can you just start from the beginning? You haven't even told me yet what the patient came in with.
Are you serious? Don't you know I'm an emergency consultant? Why can't you just accept this patient's coming your way and we can both get on with our day? Why are you being so obstructive?
Look, I don't have time to argue with you at the moment. I'm late for clinic and I haven't even had lunch yet. Look, if you can't tell me about the patient, then find someone who can and get them to ring me back. I am not accepting this patient. Oh. All right, back out of character. All right, so I thought we'll just do a little bit of a mini debrief of the role play that you just witnessed. So what you witnessed there was a situation where two busy doctors who were busy and distracted, who didn't know each other, and both had competing needs. There was no polite introduction at the start of the phone call. And what you saw also was the use of depersonalising language. Is that PEDS? The conversation was held over the telephone, which in itself is depersonalising. And the admitting registrar was busy, distracted, multitasking, probably quite overworked and hungry and late. All of the criteria that we need to kind of not be good at our jobs. And the referring doctor was quite abrupt in her conversation, and I have to say a little bit rude in her initial referral.
Sorry about that.
And didn't really provide the information that I needed at my end. And that caused some defensive tones on the part of the receiving registrar. And then some rudeness crept in, and it created the perfect environment for the conflict that you saw play out. So how can we do this better? I think the first thing we can do is turn up with the intention to be kind and compassionate. Now, not just to our patients, but also to our colleagues. No one turns up to work with the intention of being rude and to go and seek out conflict. But it happens because we get busy, overworked, overwhelmed, hungry, angry, tired, and late. We need to learn effective communication techniques and conflict resolution skills. And these are skills that can be taught, but they're not common features of most of the medical curriculums that we had during our training. We need to create better systems within our hospitals that allow patients to move through our organisation smoothly and don't create unnecessary opportunities for conflict to arise. These might be things like agreed admission pathways for our patients, or a care bundle for a particular condition, like an eating disorder patient, that takes away the individual opinion out of the need for that admission and creates pathways that don't create the opportunity for conflict. Escalation tools can be really useful for doctors that find themselves involved in conflict to actually be able to reach out to a third-party mediator to help resolve that conflict. And I think as senior doctors, one of the most important things that we can do is to role model effective conflict resolution skills to our junior staff.
So this brings us back to our friends, Doctors Marco and Smith, and they developed a model for resolving conflict in the emergency department. although I must say some of these rules are probably pretty good for life. Communication is an essential tool for medicine and conflict resolution. So effective communication might look like communicating in person and making sure you're giving that person your full attention when you're speaking with them. If you can accept a difference of opinion, it means that you're able to see the other person's perspective, and that, as we said before, can help you broaden a differential diagnosis or further develop a treatment plan. When we establish common goals, we're practicing patient-centred care, because at the end of the day, all of us just want the best outcome for the patient. It's important to separate the person from the problem and try not to take it personally when someone disagrees with you. I know this can be really tricky when you feel like your clinical acumen is being questioned. When difficult conversations need to be had, it's really important that they're done calmly and behind closed doors. Of course, this kind of privacy is pretty difficult to achieve sometimes in a clinical environment, so make sure you remember that you're role modelling these conversation skills for all of your staff. Maintain a professional tone. Most solutions require some kind of compromise to come out with a good outcome, and again, this requires some understanding of the other person's perspective. By establishing specific commitments and expectations, both parties are on the same page as to how the problem is going to be resolved. Ongoing communication might be during that instance of patient care, but it also might continue later. Those future conversations may help prevent the conflict recurring again for the same issues. And if all else fails, try the use of a neutral or more senior mediator. Sometimes these conversations do need to go up the chain. Of course, it's a bit of a trick when the conflict has arisen at the consultant level. Awkward. But most importantly, be pleasant. We think Queensland Health's values of care, accountability, respect and excellence could simply be simplified to don't be a dick.
So Thomas and Kilman described 5 types of conflict resolution strategies. So competing, collaborating, compromising, avoiding and accommodating. And these fit on 2 axes. So the first being the assertiveness axis, which is really about how much you focus on your own needs. And the second axis is the cooperativeness axis, which is how much you focus on the needs of others. And everyone has their preferred conflict style. And every conflict situation is different. So we're not saying that you need to kind of pick one of these that is the perfect conflict resolution style, but you need to think about the situation you're in and what are the needs of that situation. So having an awareness of your own style is really important, your own preferred style, but also ideally having an awareness of the person that you're communicating with and their preferred style can actually be really helpful in avoiding conflict. But also thinking about the type of situation and what the needs of that situation are. So sometimes in an emergency situation, we do need to take a competing style. It's a high-stakes situation, we need to make decisions quickly, and we need to turn up that level of assertiveness a little bit so that we can actually make quick, decisive actions. But in other situations, we might have more time, and the stakes might be less high, and we might be able to take more of an accommodating approach to the situation that puts the importance of the relationship over the importance of the outcome. So being flexible in our style actually makes us better communicators and more likely to approach a situation of conflict through a lens of curiosity and mutual respect. So when conflict is handled well, it can provide a trigger for growth and change. It can create diversity of ideas, and it can encourage creativity and sometimes helps us find those creative solutions to those wicked problems that we find in the workplace. It can cause positive change in workplace culture and actually help us to build better relationships within our team.
So we've got some final compilation of tips for you to avoid conflict in the workplace. Always show your colleagues respect. Try to change what the to what's their frame. So understanding someone else's perspective is going to help you solve the problem. As Mel said, we recommend the development of health service guidelines because if there's an agreed admission or treatment pathway for a particular condition, then that completely negates the opportunity to develop conflict in the workplace. Take time building relationships. So build social capital by getting to know your colleagues. It would be much easier to have a conversation with someone, even over the phone, if you knew them. As we said, communicate face to face where possible. Stay calm and pick your battles. I can't emphasise that enough, because actually that's a useful thing when you're parenting as well. Focus on the issue at hand. Deal with that issue and don't bring up past incidents. Allow each person to express their views, understand the aspect that they're coming from. As Stephen Covey said, seek first to understand. So label the problem and set boundaries to acceptable behaviour. If the behaviour that you're on the other end of is something that's inappropriate, either call it out at that time or make a time later on to have a cool conversation about the way it all had gone. Negotiate a solution and find common ground. That's how you're going to find the best outcomes for your patients. So in closing, we'd like to challenge you today to change the way you think about conflict in the workplace. Conflict is an opportunity. It's not a threat to be avoided at all cost. Conflict, handled respectfully, can be an amazing way to build positive relationships and gain the respect of your colleagues. And conflict handled, fail. Don't shy away from it when you see it happening. Run towards it and role model effective conflict resolution skills for your team. That's how we change our culture, one interaction at a time. Thank you. So close. I would just like to say thanks to Mel for standing in at very last notice when Alex was unable to come along. So thank you, Mel, for standing in for me.
Thank you. As an avid conflict avoider, that was very useful for me. I have a question. This, in some ways, is a little bit of an echo chamber. We're all really interested in being better clinicians. So how can we help our colleagues, potentially those people who are not so enlightened as ourselves, to be better? We can role model, but that's one end. We can't all be give, and they can't all be take. How can we help them?
So I have conflict on my radar. I've got eyes everywhere in the department, and when I hear it or I see it, even from a distance, it'll just be the body language between my intern who's making a referral to an inpatient registrar or something, and you'll just pick up on something about the interaction that you're witnessing, and I'll run towards it. And I'll be that mediator sometimes. Sometimes I'll pick up and push my intern behind me for safety and take one for the team and actually try and role model a respectful resolution. But I think I agree with Bethany. The biggest impact for me has been developing social capital. So in a hospital where I've worked for more than a decade, I've made a point of getting to know most people, and I don't have issues with referring to people that I know, and I think that's made the biggest impact on my practice.
So with that in mind, the key word I often use in these conflicts is another C word, it's consultant. How can we avoid that? We have this amazing privilege often as consultants, and often you just have to say, this is the emergency department consultant, and conflict disappears. How can we help the junior staff?
I think there's got to be an opportunity to watch them perform, and then in a positive culture of feedback environment, sit down and have conversations with them. How did that conversation go for you? It's often when you're sitting at the desk and you have your junior sitting next to you and you hear the conversation that they're having, you think that what they're having on the other end of the phone is less than ideal. So I think taking the opportunity after they have that experience to debrief, for want of a better word, and then provide some feedback on their role and some tips in real life on how to manage that's probably part of it. But having a culture of feedback, probably within the department and out with as well, having communication between different departments is also very important at consultant level for other teams to understand that we talk at this level, so we expect there to be respectful behaviour at that level.
Does anyone else have any questions in the audience? Okay, thank you very much.